She wore the same scarf for 27 years, and no one ever saw what was underneath, until today. Hi there, welcome back. What you're about to witness is the most shocking case Dr. Lee has ever seen. A woman hiding a painful secret under her hair for nearly 3 decades, and the moment she decides, no more hiding. If stories of strength, healing, and second chances move you, hit that subscribe button now and join us for more real stories that stay with you long after they end. The sound of running water echoed off the tile walls, sharp and steady like a ticking clock. Elizabeth gripped the edge of the sink, her fingers pale from the pressure. The steam from the shower curled in the air, soft and ghost-like, masking the reflection in the fogged mirror. She didn't dare wipe it clean. She didn't want to see. Her fingers moved shakily to the edge of the scarf tied tightly around her head. For a moment she considered untying it, just for a minute, just to let her scalp breathe. But then it happened. Her foot slipped. A thud, sharp and wet, cracked through the silence. Elizabeth's body slammed against the cold bathroom floor, her side catching the edge of the tub. A dull moan escaped her lips, then a choked gasp as a sharp pain shot through her back. Blood, bright, shocking, began to seep across the white tile blooming beneath her silver hair. The scarf had fallen off. The door burst open. Tiny feet, a child's scream, "Abuela!" Daniela's daughter, only 6, stood frozen at the doorway, her eyes wide with terror. Her little hands trembled as she took a step forward, then another. Her gaze was fixed on Elizabeth's bare head, on the grotesque shapes that sprawled across her scalp like blooming wounds. The girl whimpered, then cried out for her mother. Everything after that blurred. The ambulance, the flashing lights, the hallway ceiling spinning overhead, Daniela shouting, Elizabeth drifting. My name is Daniela, and I've known Elizabeth for almost 10 years. To most people in our neighborhood, she's just another quiet woman, polite and reserved. She goes to church, helps watch my kids, and makes the most incredible tamales you've ever tasted. But no one really knows her, not the way I do. To me, Elizabeth is family. I married her youngest son, and over time she became something more than a mother-in-law. She became my compass. There's a strength in her silence, in the way she always folds her hands before she speaks, as if weighing every word carefully. But behind that quiet strength was a secret she guarded with her life. Only once, maybe twice, had I ever seen what she kept hidden beneath her scarves and hats. She never spoke of it, not even when I gently asked. Not even when her granddaughter had nightmares after that night in the bathroom. She just said, "It's nothing, it's just part of me." But it wasn't nothing. It was something terrible, something painful, something she had carried alone for nearly 30 years. The first time she let me see it, really see it, was 4 years ago. We were folding laundry together. She dropped a towel, and when she bent to pick it up, her scarf slipped slightly. I caught a glimpse of something pink and swollen just above her ear. Fleshy, lumpy, unnatural. She froze when she saw me looking. I looked away quickly. I didn't ask questions. That's the thing about Elizabeth. You don't push her. You wait until she's ready. But I knew, in that moment, that she was hiding more than just disfigurement. She was hiding shame, fear, pain, and maybe even regret. Still, I didn't know the full story. Not yet. It took a fall, a hard, terrifying fall, and the terrified scream of a child to finally break the silence. In the days that followed, she barely spoke. The doctors said she'd been lucky. No broken bones, just deep bruising and a superficial scalp laceration from one of the growths rupturing when she hit the floor. They called them tumors. Benign, they said, but numerous, complex, scattered across her entire scalp. That was the first time a medical professional had seen her without a covering in more than 2 decades, and it shook her. "I can't let this happen again," she whispered to me one night, when the house was quiet and the painkillers had dulled her voice. "But I don't want them to see me. I don't want them to look at me like she did, like my granddaughter did." I didn't know what to say, so I held her hand. That was the beginning of the long, winding road that led us to a white medical tent on the edge of Riverside, California, where a traveling team of doctors was offering free consultations. One of them was famous. One of them might just be brave enough to help Elizabeth reclaim her life. The morning of the appointment, Elizabeth sat at the edge of her bed, clutching her hands together like she was praying. Her scarf was already wrapped around her head, tighter than usual. The soft light spilling through the blinds carved long lines across her face. revealing the age and wear of a woman who had learned to live without asking for anything. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked, standing in the doorway with my keys in hand. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the floor. Then she nodded, slowly, once. "I'm not doing it for me," she said, her voice low. "I'm doing it for her. For Sophia." Sophia, her granddaughter. The one who had seen her on the bathroom floor. The one who had nightmares, for weeks afterward, waking in tears, whispering about monsters. It had broken Elizabeth in a way I hadn't seen before. Not the fall, not the pain, but the fear in that child's eyes. "She doesn't think you're a monster," I said gently, kneeling beside her. "She's just a little girl. She didn't understand." Elizabeth looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired, worn. "Neither did I," she said. "Not for a long time." I reached for her hand. It was cold, trembling. She didn't pull away. As we drove, the silence was thick. Elizabeth stared out the window, her eyes following the palm trees as they blurred past. I could feel the weight pressing on her chest, the fear that today might be the day someone truly saw her, not just her scalp, her shame, her history, her everything. I tried to distract her. "Do you remember when we first met?" I asked with a smile. She blinked, pulled from her thoughts. "Your wedding. You spilled wine on your dress before the ceremony." I laughed. "You made me laugh through the whole thing, even when your son was crying like a baby." Her lips curled slightly, a ghost of a smile, but it faded fast. "Carlos never saw," she said quietly. "Not even once." I didn't need to ask what she meant. Carlos, her fiancé from long ago. The man she almost married before everything changed. "I almost told him," she continued. "But I couldn't. I thought, if he saw, he'd leave. And if he left, I wouldn't survive that." "You don't know that," I whispered. "I do," she said, more to herself than to me. "I do." We arrived at the white medical tent a few minutes early. It sat on the edge of a large church parking lot, surrounded by folding chairs and patient faces. People from all backgrounds stood in line, hoping for a chance at healing. Some limped, some leaned on canes. Others, like Elizabeth, kept their pain hidden beneath fabric and silence. We checked in. They handed us a number and told us to wait under the shaded area. Elizabeth's hands never stopped moving, fidgeting with her scarf, gripping the chair, twisting the hem of her sweater. When they finally called her name, she froze. "Elizabeth Garcia?" a nurse repeated kindly. She didn't move. I stood and gently touched her shoulder. "Come on, you're brave enough. I know you are." She looked at me, eyes wide, almost childlike in fear. But beneath that fear, I saw something else, something small but real. Hope. She rose slowly, her legs stiff, her back hunched. She walked like a woman stepping onto a stage with no costume, no mask, no lines to hide behind. As we followed the nurse inside, I realized something I hadn't before. Today wasn't just about seeing a doctor. It was about being seen, fully, truthfully, for the first time in decades. And that terrified her more than anything else in the world. There was a time when Elizabeth used to sing, not just hum under her breath or murmur along with the radio. She used to sing with her whole body, filling the house with warmth. Her voice was smooth, not powerful, but comforting. Like sunlight on old wood, like the last notes of a lullaby. Back then, she lived in a modest home in East Los Angeles, with a courtyard full of bougainvillea and a neighbor who played guitar too loudly on weekends. She was 23 and worked in a tailoring shop downtown. Her hands were steady and skilled, known for stitching the cleanest seams and fixing even the most hopeless dresses. Customers would ask for her by name, La Joven que Canta, the girl who sings. That was how Carlos noticed her. He came in one afternoon to have a tear fixed on his only suit. His job interview was the next day. He was awkward, soft-spoken, and had the kind of grin that made you want to smile back, even if you didn't know why. When she sang under her breath while measuring his sleeve, he stood still longer than he needed to. When she handed him the ticket stub, his fingers brushed hers just slightly. He came back 3 times in 2 weeks, not because the suit needed more work, but because he needed more reasons to see her, and so it began. Elizabeth hadn't known love could feel so easy. They met after her shifts, sitting on the stoop of his cousin's apartment building, sharing tamales and soda. He told her about his dream to open a mechanic shop. She told him about her father's singing voice, the voice she inherited. They laughed. They planned. They hoped. The proposal came on a Tuesday. No grand gesture, just 2 hands holding each other tightly in a quiet park. a ring he could barely afford, and a promise that didn't need fanfare. They set a date, September 1986. Then, 3 months before the wedding, her father died. He had been sick for years, strange growths on his scalp that he never explained. Elizabeth remembered helping him clean the wounds when she was a girl, her small hands trembling as he winced in pain. He always wore hats, always said the sun bothered his skin. She'd never asked too many questions. It was just Papa, strong, proud, private. But at the hospital, after the stroke, the doctors had to remove his hat. Elizabeth saw it all. The pink mounds, the swollen cauliflower-like clusters that seemed to erupt from his skin like something alive. She had nightmares for days. 2 weeks later, while brushing her hair, she found the first bump, small, painless, near her right temple. At first, she said nothing. Maybe it was a pimple. Maybe she was just imagining it. But deep down, something clenched inside her, a whisper of panic that grew louder with every passing week. She canceled her hair appointment for the wedding, then her dress fitting. Then one morning, she woke up with 2 more lumps. Carlos noticed. Of course he did. But she brushed it off, said it was stress, hormones, nothing to worry about. He believed her. Why wouldn't he? The week before the wedding, the seamstress offered to let out the neckline of her gown. Elizabeth declined. She knew she wouldn't wear it. 2 nights before the ceremony, she sat Carlos down. She didn't show him. She just told him there was something wrong, that she needed time, that maybe they weren't meant to rush. Carlos begged her to explain, but she couldn't. She didn't have the words, or the courage. He left with tears in his eyes, still holding the ring. She never saw him again. After that, the singing stopped. The joy that had once moved through her voice seemed to shrink into her throat. She quit the tailoring shop a few months later, claiming she needed to care for her mother. But the truth was, she couldn't bear people looking at her scalp, even through a scarf. The growths multiplied, slowly but steadily. She saw 2 doctors, both who dismissed her concerns, calling it skin tags or benign bumps. One offered to freeze them off, but the pain was unbearable, and they came back. Worse. Then came the comment from the nurse. Elizabeth had gone in for a routine blood test. When the nurse asked her to remove her head covering, Elizabeth hesitated. The nurse sighed. "You people and your traditions," she muttered, tugging the scarf away. Then silence. A sharp intake of breath. The nurse recoiled slightly. "I wasn't expecting that." Elizabeth didn't say a word. She pulled the scarf back on, walked out of the clinic, and never returned. That was the last time she sought help, for over 2 decades. She found work as a cook in a church kitchen, where the uniform included a hairnet and a cap. She kept her head down, literally and figuratively. She never married, never sang, never dared to dream again. But she carried the music inside her, buried beneath shame, beneath silence, beneath the pink and swollen tumors that slowly claimed more and more of her scalp. She buried her mother. She watched her brothers scatter. She lived alone for years until one of her sons, Alejandro, convinced her to move in with his wife, me. At first she resisted, but her body was slowing. Her vision wasn't what it used to be. And the headaches, they had started coming more often. She came with 2 suitcases and a box of old photographs, but even then she never let me help her unpack. She said she preferred to do it alone. Looking back, I understand why. There were things in that box, secrets, grief, and memories she hadn't touched in decades. And maybe, somewhere in that mix, the smallest ember of hope. Moving in with us should have been the start of something easier for Elizabeth. A soft landing into the comfort of family, a warm kitchen, the laughter of children, a bedroom of her own with a window that caught the morning light just right. But healing doesn't come just because we change our address. She was polite, grateful, always the first to wash the dishes, fold the laundry, sweep the floors. She made fresh tortillas every Sunday, the kind that puffed up perfectly on the stove. She helped Sophia with her reading, even though her English wasn't strong, and rocked baby Mateo to sleep with the same gentle rhythm she'd once used for her own sons. But she remained a visitor in her own home. She never spoke unless spoken to, never joined us on the couch for movies, never came outside when we had neighbors over for cookouts, and she never, not once, took off her headscarf, not even at bedtime. Alejandro, my husband, told me not to worry. "She's just private," he said. "She's always been like that." But I didn't believe that was the whole truth. There was something about the way Elizabeth avoided mirrors, the way she flinched when the kids reached up to touch her head, The way she always positioned herself so the back of her head was against a wall, like she needed a fortress at her back. I first suspected the truth one afternoon when I walked past her bedroom and saw the door slightly ajar. She didn't notice me. She was seated at the edge of the bed, her scarf half unwrapped, her fingers delicately pressing around the base of something swollen just behind her ear. It was just a glimpse, 1 second, maybe 2, but it was enough. She saw me in the mirror, froze. I didn't say anything, I just kept walking. The next day, she avoided me completely. I didn't push. Not then. I knew better. With Elizabeth, everything had to come on her time. But the silence started to weigh heavier between us. That week, Sophia asked me a question I didn't expect. Why does Abuela always wear her hat, even in the bathtub? I paused. She just likes it, I said. Sophia scrunched her nose. But it's weird. She doesn't want anyone to see her head. Is she bald? She's just different, I said gently, and sometimes different is okay. Sophia nodded slowly, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. And then came the fall. It was a Thursday evening, close to bedtime. I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when I heard the sound, the heavy, awful thud from down the hallway. A child's cry followed, high-pitched and panicked. I dropped the sponge and ran. The bathroom door was open. Sophia stood frozen, one hand over her mouth, the other pointing. Elizabeth lay crumpled on the floor, her body twisted awkwardly, blood seeping from the back of her head. Her scarf had fallen off. And there it was. Even in the chaos, even with the paramedics arriving minutes later, I couldn't unsee it. Her scalp was covered in growths, dozens of them. Some the size of grapes, others larger, tangled together like flesh-colored knots. They were pink and bulbous, clustered so tightly in places that I couldn't even see skin between them. The sight terrified me, but not because of what it was, because of what it meant. How long had she carried this burden alone? How many years had she suffered in silence, convinced she had to hide? In the emergency room, she kept her eyes closed the entire time. The doctors were kind but clinical, detached. One of them whispered the word cylindromas, but it meant nothing to me then. They patched her up, bandaged her scalp, gave her something for the pain. I brought her home that night, gently guiding her up the steps, her body shaking beneath mine like a bird too exhausted to fly. We didn't speak for 2 days. On the 3rd day, I knocked on her door and walked in without waiting. She sat by the window, facing away from me. Her scarf was back in place. "You scared us," I said softly. "I'm sorry." I sat beside her, letting the silence stretch. Then I asked, "Why haven't you ever told anyone?" Her voice was quiet. "Because I didn't want anyone to look at me the way Sophia did." "She's just a child," I said. "But I'm not," she replied. "I know what people see when they look. I know the face they make." I turned toward her. "You've lived in hiding for almost 30 years, Elizabeth. I know. You don't have to anymore." She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes were brimming not with tears, but with something older, something deeper. "I don't know who I am without this." The words settled between us like dust. It wasn't self-pity, it wasn't melodrama, it was truth. She had spent so long being the woman with the scarf, the one who never showed her head, the quiet helper, that even the idea of healing felt like erasure. Like removing her armor would leave her naked, exposed to a world that had already hurt her once. But that fall, it had shaken something loose. And somewhere beneath the fear, I saw a flicker of something else. A question she hadn't dared to ask in decades. What if it doesn't have to be this way? After the fall, Elizabeth moved slower. Not just in her body, but in her spirit. Something had shifted. The quiet she once wore like a comfortable shawl now felt heavy, suffocating. Her world, already small, had shrunk even further. She spent most days in her room, the curtains half drawn. When she did come out, it was only for a few minutes at a time, to warm tortillas, to fold laundry, to sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that always went cold. I watched her drift, and I didn't know how to reach her. One afternoon, I brought her a fresh basket of laundry and placed it on the end of her bed. "Do you want me to help fold these?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "No, I like doing it. It keeps my hands busy." Her voice had a brittle edge, like old paper. I sat anyway, watched as she picked up a baby onesie and began folding it with mechanical precision. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She folded another shirt, then another. Finally she said, "There was a nurse, a long time ago." She made a face when she saw me, like she touched something rotten. I stayed quiet. Elizabeth kept folding. She didn't say anything cruel, but she didn't have to. Her face said it all: disgust, pity, fear. She was wrong, I said. She didn't reply. After a moment she stood and placed the folded clothes in a drawer. Then she turned to face me. "I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe God made me this way because I was vain." My chest tightened. What? When I was young, I cared so much about appearances, pretty dresses, hair just right, my voice, my nails. She looked down at her hands, gnarled now by time. "Maybe this is what I deserve. Don't say that. I hid from Carlos," she continued. "I didn't give him a chance to love me as I was. Maybe he would have, maybe he wouldn't. But I didn't even let him try." I reached out and held her hand. "You were scared," I said. "That's not a crime, but I've stayed scared," she whispered. "All these years." The silence stretched. I could feel her trembling through her palm. "I look in the mirror sometimes," she said. "Not often. But when I do, I can't recognize myself. I see the tumors, the scars, and I wonder what's underneath it all. If there's even anything left." "There is," I said firmly. "You're still here, Elizabeth. You've raised 2 sons, you've held my babies, you've kept this family together in ways we can't even name." She turned away, her eyes glossy. "But I've never let anyone see me. Not really. Even you." I swallowed hard. "Then let me." She didn't move. "Let me help," I said. "Let me fight for you. You don't have to do this alone anymore." She stayed silent, but her shoulders softened, just a little. That night I lay awake in bed, replaying her words. "I wonder what's underneath it all. If there's even anything left." I couldn't accept that. I wouldn't. The next morning I opened my laptop and began searching. Forums, articles, old YouTube videos. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, just something. A crack of light. A story like hers that had a better ending. And then I found it. A clip, barely 10 minutes long, of a woman in a white coat removing strange pink growths from a man's scalp. "Cylindromas," the caption read. "Benign but disfiguring. Inherited condition. Rare." The doctor's name was familiar. Dr. Sandra Lee. I clicked through video after video, watching her speak gently to patients, listening to their stories before touching a single tool. She wasn't just a doctor, she was a listener, a healer of more than skin. At the bottom of her channel page, I found a link. Volunteer clinics, free consultations for uninsured patients. One of the upcoming locations? Riverside, California, just 45 minutes from us. I didn't wait. I filled out the form, uploaded pictures, ones I'd taken years ago. The only ones I had where Elizabeth's scarf had slipped slightly. I wrote the whole story, every word of it. At the bottom, I typed, "She's the strongest person I know, but even the strong need help." I hit send. 3 days later, I got a call. "Hi, this is Dr. Lee's office. We reviewed your submission, and we'd like to offer Elizabeth an appointment at the Riverside Clinic next weekend." My heart pounded. "Is she ready?" the woman asked. I hesitated. "Yes," I said. "She will be." I waited 2 days before I told her, not because I was unsure, but because I knew how delicate the timing had to be. Elizabeth wasn't someone you could rush. Her walls had been built brick by brick, over years of silence and shame. It would take care, precision, to help her take even one of them down. So I waited until the house was quiet. The kids were napping, and the sun was low in the sky, casting soft golden shadows through the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, peeling garlic, her fingers moving slowly, methodically. I sat across from her. "There's something I want to tell you," I began. She didn't look up, but I could see her body tense slightly. "Yes?" I took a breath. "I found a clinic. There's a team of doctors coming to Riverside next weekend. They specialize in your condition. One of them is very well known, Dr. Sandra Lee." Elizabeth stopped peeling. Her hands went still. "I sent them your story," I continued. "Some pictures. I told them everything. And they called me. They want to see you." Her eyes lifted slowly to meet mine. There was no anger in them, only fear, a deep, ancient kind of fear. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "I had to." She shook her head. "It's not your place." "I know," I said, "but I couldn't stand by anymore. Not after the fall. Not after everything you've told me." "I'm not a show," she said bitterly. "Not some sad story to be fixed in front of a camera. This isn't about that," I said. "This is about you not dying in the dark." Her face hardened. "I'm not dying." "No," I said. "But you're not living either." The words hung between us. Heavy, true. Elizabeth turned her gaze to the window. Outside, Sophia and Mateo were drawing on the driveway with chalk. Sophia had written the word family in uneven, colorful letters. A stick figure version of Elizabeth stood among the rest. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know." "What if they look at me like she did?" Her voice broke. "What if I see that face again?" "They won't," I said. "Not this doctor. She's different. She listens. She's seen this before. Worse." Elizabeth shook her head. "I don't know if I can do it." "You don't have to do it alone," I said. "I'll be there every step of the way." She fell silent. After a long pause, she stood, walked to the sink and washed her hands. I thought maybe the conversation was over, that I'd pushed too far. But then she spoke. "When I was a girl," she said, her back still turned, "I was terrified of thunderstorms. Every time it rained, I'd crawl under the table and plug my ears. My father would sit with me, not to scold me, not to force me out, just to be there, quietly, waiting." She turned to face me. "You remind me of him." My throat tightened. She dried her hands on a towel, folded it neatly, then looked at me with tired but determined eyes. "Okay," she said. "I'll go." Relief crashed through me like a wave. I stood up too quickly, my hands trembling. "Really?" She nodded. "But I can't promise I'll let them touch me," she added. "Or that I'll say anything, or even take off my scarf." "That's okay," I said. "You just have to show up." She sat back down, and for the first time in weeks, her shoulders eased, just slightly. "Riverside is a long drive," she said. "Will we need to pack lunch?" I laughed. It caught me off guard. "I'll handle that," I said. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm. We didn't talk about the appointment, not directly. But I noticed the subtle changes. She cleaned her room more thoroughly than usual, laid out 2 possible outfits. She even clipped her fingernails, shaping them gently, like she used to when she was younger, as if preparing to meet someone important. The night before, I found her sitting at the edge of her bed, holding a photograph. It was old, faded. A young Elizabeth, in her 20s, singing into a hairbrush, her hair long and loose, her eyes full of light. "Carlos took this," she said when she noticed me. "He said I looked like I belonged on stage." "You did," I said. She smiled, just barely. "I sometimes wonder what he would think now, if he would still recognize me." "He would," I said. "He'd see the same heart." She set the photo down and wrapped the scarf around her head again, slower this time, more thoughtfully. "I don't want to hope," she said. "Hope is dangerous." "Maybe," I said, "but hiding hurts more." She didn't reply. The next morning, we left early. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the sky was still pale with sleep. Elizabeth carried a small bag, her ID, a bottle of water, and a rosary tucked into the side pocket. She wore a loose blouse, soft jeans, and her most familiar scarf, the red one with faded roses. We didn't speak much on the drive, just shared quiet music and the occasional glance. But somewhere along the freeway, I saw her reach up and gently press her hand to her head, as if making peace with what was beneath. When we arrived at the clinic, the parking lot was already buzzing. Folding chairs, pop-up tents, nurses with clipboards. Elizabeth took a deep breath, then another, and then she stepped out of the car. She was still trembling, but she was walking. The tent wasn't what she expected. Elizabeth had imagined something sterile and cold. A hospital ward under a tarp maybe, with fluorescent lights and strangers in masks barking orders. But what she found was warmth. Organized chaos, yes, but with a human pulse running through it. There were rows of folding chairs set up beneath white canvas awnings. Volunteers passed out water bottles and clipboards. Children tugged on their mothers' hands. A woman with a cane laughed softly at something her granddaughter whispered in her ear. It felt more like a community gathering than a medical event. Still, Elizabeth hesitated. I saw her eyes flick around the space, calculating exits, watching faces. Every step forward felt like a step toward being exposed, vulnerable, seen. I gently touched her elbow. "They're expecting us." She nodded once, then walked beside me, her gait stiff but steady. We checked in at a folding table manned by a cheerful young nurse in scrubs. She didn't stare. She didn't ask questions. Just confirmed the name, handed us a numbered card, and gestured toward a waiting area. "Dr. Lee will be with you shortly," she said with a warm smile. Elizabeth didn't smile back, but she clutched the card like it was a lifeline. We sat in silence. Around us, conversations buzzed, low murmurs of worry, hope, logistics. Elizabeth kept her gaze fixed on the ground. I noticed her fingers trembling in her lap, so I reached over and gave her hand a quick squeeze. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're not alone." She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. A few minutes later, another nurse appeared. This one was older, with soft eyes and silver hair pulled back into a bun. "Elizabeth Garcia?" she called gently. Elizabeth stood slowly. Her scarf shifted slightly in the movement, but she didn't fix it. The nurse smiled. "Dr. Lee is just around the corner. We'll take you to a private exam area." The word private seemed to soften Elizabeth's posture by an inch. As we followed the nurse through a narrow walkway between tents, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps, medical instruments clinking gently, and the low hum of generators in the background. The temporary walls flapped slightly in the breeze, casting moving shadows. Then we turned a corner, and there she was. Dr. Lee stood just outside a treatment area, reviewing a chart. She was smaller than I expected, but there was something grounded about her presence. She looked up when she heard us, her face lighting with calm recognition. "Hi there," she said, stepping forward with her hand extended. "You must be Elizabeth." Elizabeth hesitated for just a moment, then shook her hand. "This is my daughter-in-law," she said quietly. "Daniela." Dr. Lee nodded at me. "Nice to meet you both. Thank you for coming." She turned back to Elizabeth, her tone gentle but professional. "We'll take our time today. You're in control. You only need to show me what you're comfortable with, and if anything feels too much, we stop. Okay?" Elizabeth nodded, but her lips pressed into a tight line. Dr. Lee led us into a small partitioned area where a simple exam chair stood beside a tray of tools. No harsh lights, no cold metal tables. Just a small stool, a light on a stand, and a kind of softness to the whole space, like someone had gone out of their way to make it feel less like a clinic, more like a conversation. "I've read your file," Dr. Lee said as she pulled on gloves, "and I saw the photos Daniela sent in, but I'd like to take a closer look if that's okay." Elizabeth swallowed. I haven't taken this off in front of anyone in a long time." "That's perfectly all right," Dr. Lee said. "Take your time." There was a silence then, thick and breathing. Elizabeth's hands moved slowly to the edges of her scarf. Her fingers faltered once, then found their rhythm. She untied the knot at the back of her neck and gently, so gently, slid the scarf away. She didn't look up. She couldn't. But I watched Dr. Lee's expression closely. There was no flinch, no shock, just a softening, a quiet breath in, and then a nod. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. Elizabeth's head was bowed. I could see her eyes shimmering, but no tears fell. "Doctor." Lee moved slowly around her, examining the clusters of growths. Some were large and protruding, others small but angry-looking. The skin between them was red in places, irritated from years of pressure and friction. It was clear, this wasn't just a cosmetic issue. It was medical. It was painful. It was a history written on skin. "These are called cylindromas," Dr. Lee said gently. "They're benign tumors, non-cancerous, but they grow over time and can become very uncomfortable, especially in clusters like this." Elizabeth finally spoke. "My father had them." Dr. Lee nodded. "It can be hereditary, and I know this isn't easy, but I want you to know you are not the first person I've seen with this. And you're not alone." Elizabeth's lip trembled. She closed her eyes. I reached for her hand again. She squeezed it back. "I think we can help you," Dr. Lee said. "We may need to do this in stages. We'll start small, removing a few of the most uncomfortable ones. Then we'll see how your skin heals. If all goes well, we can continue from there." Elizabeth nodded. "Just once. Would you like to start today?" Dr. Lee asked. There was a long pause. Then, barely audible, Elizabeth said, "Yes." Elizabeth sat still in the exam chair, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes closed as Dr. Lee prepared the instruments. There was a hush in the tent now, an expectant quiet, broken only by the soft rustling of gloves, the gentle clink of metal, the occasional murmur between nurse and doctor. "This first one is right above the ear," Dr. Lee said calmly. "It looks like one of the larger growths, but also the one causing the most pressure. We'll start here." Elizabeth nodded but didn't speak. I stood just behind the chair, close enough for her to feel me there. I didn't want to crowd her, but I needed her to know she wasn't alone. "You're going to feel a pinch," Dr. Lee said. "That's just the numbing medicine going in. Deep breath." Elizabeth flinched slightly as the needle entered her skin, but she didn't cry out. Her eyes opened for a moment, then shut again. "She's tough," I whispered to no one in particular. Dr. Lee smiled without looking up. I can see that. The procedure began. There was no dramatic slicing, no movie-style theatrics, just quiet, meticulous work. Dr. Lee made a small incision around the base of the growth, careful and deliberate. The tumor was dense, solid, not filled with fluid like a cyst. It's sitting right on a bed of blood vessels, she murmured. We'll go slow, try to keep the bleeding minimal. She worked in layers, gradually separating the mass from the scalp beneath. Every time a blood vessel oozed, the nurse was there to blot and cauterize, a delicate dance between control and speed. I watched, heart pounding. It was surreal. The very thing Elizabeth had hidden for decades, this tangled, swollen mass of cells, was now being peeled away, one careful stroke at a time. About halfway through, I glanced down and realized her hands had unclenched. They now rested open in her lap, palms up, fingers twitching slightly, a tiny sign of surrender. We're almost there, Dr. Lee said. You're doing amazing. Elizabeth finally opened her eyes. She didn't speak, but she looked toward me. Her gaze was glassy, vulnerable, but not panicked. It was the look of someone who'd crossed a threshold they never thought they'd reach. The final tug came as Dr. Lee lifted the bulk of the growth from her scalp. The mass was larger than I'd realized, like a small plum, and streaked with fine blood vessels. She placed it gently in a steel bowl, then turned back to cauterize the remaining tissue. Smoke curled in the air for a moment, not harsh, but sharp, the scent of something old being released. I'll close this with a few stitches, Dr. Lee said. Then we'll bandage it, monitor for bleeding, and let you rest. Elizabeth nodded again. Her voice still caught somewhere inside her chest. As the stitches went in, I stepped forward and reached for her hand again. This time she squeezed mine first. When Dr. Lee finished, she peeled off her gloves and looked Elizabeth directly in the eye. You did something incredibly brave today, she said. I don't just mean letting us treat you. I mean facing something that's haunted you for a long, long time. Elizabeth opened her mouth. For a moment I thought she'd say something, but instead she smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. Dr. Lee returned the smile, then turned to me. We'll keep her for observation a little while, then she can go home. Will she be okay tonight? I asked. Most likely, Dr. Lee said. But the first 24 hours are always the most delicate. There can be swelling, bleeding, especially with vascular tumors like this. But if all goes well, she should start healing right away. I nodded, trying not to cry. A nurse brought in a mirror. Dr. Lee offered it to Elizabeth, but she shook her head. Not yet, she said. That's okay, Dr. Lee replied gently. Whenever you're ready. Later, as we sat in the recovery area, I watched her rest with a bandage on her head and a blanket over her shoulders. The tent around us buzzed with quiet motion, other patients coming and going, nurses updating charts, the low hum of medical life moving on. But for Elizabeth, time had paused. She looked different. Not just in her face, or the way she sat, but in the air around her, like something had shifted inside, something imperceptible, but irreversible. A weight lifted, not gone, but lightened. On the way back to the car, she walked slowly, but didn't ask for help. The scarf she wore had been loosely tied this time, not knotted tight like armor. I opened the passenger door for her. As she eased in, she turned to me and said something I hadn't heard from her in years. Gracias, mija. Not for lunch, not for a ride, but for everything. I nodded, blinking fast to keep the tears back. You're welcome. We drove home in silence, the kind that no longer felt heavy, but full of meaning, as if words would only get in the way. And for the first time since she came to live with us, Elizabeth didn't lower the car visor to hide her reflection in the window. She just let herself be seen. The first night after the procedure, Elizabeth barely slept. Not because of the pain, it was manageable, dulled by the medication Dr. Lee had given her. Not even because of the discomfort of the stitches or the pressure dressing wrapped around her scalp. It was something else, something older, fear. She sat in her armchair by the window, a glass of water untouched on the side table, her hands curled around a warm compress that had long gone cold. The lamp beside her cast a pool of light that made her look smaller, shrunken, like a ghost of the woman I had seen only hours earlier walking out of the clinic with a spark of life in her eyes. She kept touching the side of her head, lightly, tenderly, just above the ear where Dr. Lee had removed the tumor. It was healing, but the act of touching it was more than checking the bandage. It was disbelief, shock. maybe even grief. In the early hours of the morning, I found her like that, still dressed, still awake. "You should try to sleep," I said softly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "I can't," she replied. "Every time I close my eyes, I think it's growing back." I knelt beside her. "It won't. Dr. Lee said this part is done. You're healing." Elizabeth didn't answer, but her silence was full of doubt. The next few days were a mix of small victories and quiet dread. The wound closed nicely, the stitches held, the redness faded. The children noticed that their abuela was walking straighter, standing taller. But something else was happening. Behind her right temple, near the base of her neck, one of the older tumors had begun to change. At first it was just a deep itch, which Elizabeth tried to ignore. But then it started to throb, dull and rhythmic, like a second heartbeat under the skin. On the 4th day post-op, I saw her wince as she tried to turn her head. "You're in pain," I said. "It's nothing," she muttered, "just tension." But that night, I walked past her room and caught the sharp scent of iron in the air. Blood. I rushed in to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, a towel pressed tightly against the side of her head. The fabric was soaked through, dark red and spreading. "Why didn't you tell me?" I cried, grabbing gauze and gloves from the bathroom kit. "I thought it would stop," she whispered. The bleeding slowed after we applied pressure and wrapped the area tightly, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She wouldn't look in the mirror. She wouldn't say the word, but it hung between us, unspoken, cancer. That night, she didn't eat. She didn't speak. She just sat on the couch, wrapped in 2 blankets, her eyes fixed on a corner of the living room like she was staring through it, into some other time, some other life. The next morning, I called Dr. Lee. She picked up on the second ring. "We had a little bleeding," I said, trying to stay calm. "One of the tumors, one that wasn't removed, started leaking last night. She's in pain." Dr. Lee didn't hesitate. "Bring her in, I'll see her today." The drive to Riverside felt different this time. There was no cautious hope in the air, no quiet optimism, just weight. A heaviness in the car, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees overnight. Elizabeth sat in the passenger seat, her scarf stained at the edge. She didn't speak. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. "I should have never agreed to any of this," she whispered at one point. "I tempted fate." "You didn't tempt anything," I said firmly. "You chose to live. But what if this is my punishment? For hiding? For waiting too long?" "There is no punishment," I said. "There is only now, and you're not alone in it." She didn't answer. At the clinic, Dr. Lee ushered us into a private exam area without delay. She looked more serious this time, focused, her brow furrowed as she examined the inflamed area behind Elizabeth's ear. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said gently. "This one doesn't look like the others." Elizabeth's body stiffened. "What do you mean?" I asked. Dr. Lee removed her gloves and sighed. "It's darker in color, firmer, it's bleeding more than I'd like. It may be nothing, but I don't want to assume. I'd like to perform a biopsy, just to be safe." Elizabeth's eyes went wide. "Biopsy?" Dr. Lee nodded. "It's a simple procedure. We numb the area, remove a small sample, and send it to the lab. We'll have results in a few days." I turned to Elizabeth. She was frozen, pale. "What if it's cancer?" she asked quietly. Dr. Lee crouched beside her, leveling her voice. "Then we deal with it, together. But I need to know what we're dealing with first. That's how we fight fear, by naming it." For a long moment, Elizabeth didn't speak. Her hands trembled. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." The biopsy took less than 10 minutes, but the waiting that followed would stretch for what felt like years. The days after the biopsy were the longest of Elizabeth's life. She didn't say this aloud, but I could feel it in everything she did, and everything she didn't do. She stopped coming out for meals. She barely touched her tea. The blanket she always kept folded at the end of her bed now lived wrapped tightly around her shoulders, even in the heat of the late afternoon sun. The children noticed. Sophia drew a picture of the family at dinner. Elizabeth wasn't in it. Mateo, who had only recently learned how to say abuela, started asking where she was. I didn't know how to answer. I tried to comfort her, to bring small pieces of the world to her room. Hot soup, fresh laundry, soft music playing quietly from my phone. But she stayed distant. Her eyes often stared through the wall, like she was somewhere else entirely. On the 3rd night, I walked in to find her sitting on the floor beside her bed, holding an old wooden rosary. The beads were worn smooth, the cross at the end nearly faded from use. "I used to pray for healing," she said, her voice hoarse, "when I was younger." I sat on the floor beside her. "What changed?" Her eyes flicked toward the ceiling. I stopped believing I deserved it. The words struck me harder than I expected. "You think this is something you earned?" I asked softly. Elizabeth didn't answer. She rubbed the rosary between her palms. "When I ran from Carlos, when I left work, stopped singing, stopped living, I thought maybe it was better this way. That maybe hiding was the only thing left I knew how to do." Her voice cracked. "But this biopsy, it's like someone holding a mirror up to me and saying, 'Is this how you want to be remembered?'" She blinked hard. A woman who disappeared before she even died. I reached over and took her hand. "You are not disappearing. You're being seen, now more than ever." She looked at me. "But what if it's cancer?" "Then we fight," I said. "Together." A long silence passed. Then she asked the one question I'd been dreading. "What if I'm not ready to fight?" The truth was, I didn't have an answer for that. All I could do was sit beside her. Be present, like her father once had during thunderstorms. The clinic called 4 days later. I saw the number flash on my phone screen and froze. My heart pounded so loudly I thought I wouldn't be able to hear the words on the other end. I stepped outside, took the call with shaking hands. "Hi, this is Dr. Lee's office," the nurse said. "We have the results from Elizabeth Garcia's biopsy." My stomach clenched. "It's benign," she continued. "Completely non-cancerous. Dr. Lee says she's confident we can proceed with further removals in stages if Elizabeth wants." I didn't realize I was crying until the nurse paused and asked gently, "Are you okay?" I wiped my face. "Yes, thank you. Thank you so much." When I walked back inside, Elizabeth was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the muted television. I approached slowly, sat beside her, and took her hand. She didn't look at me. "It's not cancer," I said quietly. She didn't react at first. Her face remained still, frozen in the way trauma often locks people in place. Then she blinked. Once, twice. And then the dam broke. She didn't cry in sobs or wails. It was quieter than that. Sadder, the kind of crying that sounds more like breathing too hard. Her shoulders shook. Her hands flew to her face, as if trying to hide the emotion she'd spent a lifetime burying. I wrapped my arms around her. And for the first time since she'd moved into our home, for the first time in decades, Elizabeth let someone hold her without pulling away. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered into my shoulder. "I thought I waited too long." "You didn't," I said. "You're here. You're still here." She cried for a long time, not just for fear, I think, but for every year she'd lived in silence, for the wedding dress never worn, for the songs never sung, for the love never given a chance, and maybe, just maybe, for the future she hadn't believed she was allowed to hope for. When she finally pulled away, her face was red and damp, but softer somehow. Her eyes looked clearer. "I wanted to go back," she said. "To the clinic?" She nodded. "I want to finish what we started." I smiled, tears still on my cheeks. "Then we will." She looked down at her lap, twisting her fingers together. Do you think I could ever look normal again?" I shook my head gently. "I don't care about normal, I care about you, and you're already more than enough." She didn't smile, but she nodded. That night, she ate dinner at the table again. Sophia climbed into her lap, hugged her tightly, and whispered something only a child could say with pure honesty. "I missed your face, abuela." Elizabeth laughed, an actual, unguarded laugh. The sound was foreign, beautiful. She kissed Sophia on the forehead and whispered back, "I missed it too." 1 year later, Elizabeth stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the collar of a soft gray blouse. Her fingers, once timid and hesitant, moved with quiet certainty. Her hair was short now, fresh, silvery and neat, just grazing the nape of her neck. There were scars, of course, faint ones, but they were no longer the first thing you noticed when you looked at her. No, what you saw was a woman standing tall, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady. "You look beautiful," I said, standing in the doorway. Elizabeth turned slightly, caught my gaze in the mirror, and gave a small smile. "I'm nervous." I stepped closer. "You're supposed to be. First time doing anything this brave should come with butterflies." She smoothed the front of her shirt, her smile fading into something quieter. "I never thought I'd be in a room full of people again, let alone speaking to them. You earned this." Elizabeth chuckled softly. "I didn't go looking to become an advocate, you know." "You didn't have to," I said. "Your story found its way to others anyway, and it had. Since the procedure, since the biopsy and her decision to continue the removals, Elizabeth had slowly transformed, not just physically, but in presence. Dr. Lee had completed 2 more surgeries in the past year, carefully removing the rest of the largest tumors in stages. It hadn't been easy there, weeks of swelling, bruising, setbacks, but Elizabeth had never stopped showing up. She arrived at each appointment with her scarf tucked under her arm instead of on her head. She walked in with her chin lifted. The clinic staff came to know her name. Nurses smiled when they saw her. Dr. Lee, on their last visit, had hugged her like an old friend. And somewhere along the way, a journalist from a local paper had interviewed Elizabeth about her experience, about growing up with a hidden genetic disorder, about cultural shame, about access to healthcare for the uninsured and undocumented. The story had gone viral, quietly at first, then suddenly it was everywhere. Emails poured in, letters from strangers, women in similar conditions who had never heard the word cylindroma before reading Elizabeth's name, grandmothers, daughters, nurses. And then came the invitation from a public health nonprofit to speak at a symposium about equity in healthcare. At first, Elizabeth had laughed at the idea. What do I have to say to a room full of doctors? But over time, the answer became clear. Everything. Now, as we drove through the familiar streets of Riverside, heading toward the modest community hall where the event was being held, Elizabeth sat beside me in calm silence. Not the guarded silence of the past, but one filled with focus, resolve. She held a small note card in her hand, covered in neat handwriting. I knew the words on it by heart. I'd helped her write them, but I also knew she didn't really need the card anymore. When we pulled into the lot, a volunteer waved us toward the reserved parking near the front. Elizabeth stepped out slowly, took a long breath of morning air, and looked up at the sky. It's strange, she said. A year ago, I couldn't walk into a grocery store without thinking everyone was staring at me. Now, I'm about to tell my story in front of 100 strangers. I looped my arm through hers. Not strangers, just people who haven't met you yet. Inside, the hall buzzed with quiet energy. Rows of chairs faced a small stage. A podium stood beneath a simple banner. Health ISS, a human right. Organizers moved about with clipboards and headsets, but when they saw Elizabeth arrive, the energy shifted. Smiles, nods, warm greetings. One woman approached, eyes shining. Miss Garcia? I just wanted to say thank you. My mother has the same condition. She never thought she'd meet anyone who understood. Your story changed something in her. Elizabeth placed a hand gently on the woman's shoulder. Tell her she's not alone. They called her name about 30 minutes later. We sat in the second row. I squeezed her hand as she stood. You've got this, I whispered. She walked to the podium slowly but steadily. The room quieted. She paused for a moment before speaking, just long enough for everyone to settle into the silence. Then she looked up. My name is Elizabeth Garcia, she began, her voice soft but sure. I'm 63 years old. I'm a mother, a grandmother, and for most of my life, I hid. The words hung in the air. I wore scarves to cover what I thought was shame. I avoided mirrors. I avoided people. I even avoided love. I felt a lump rising in my throat. I didn't grow up with the language to describe what was happening to me. No one talked about it, not in my family, not in my neighborhood. I thought it was my burden to carry, alone. She paused again. Her eyes scanned the crowd. But one day someone saw me. Not just what was on my head, but me. And when they saw me, something began to change. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the scarf, the red one with faded roses. She held it up. I wore this every day for 27 years. It was my armor, my shield, my silence. Then, with careful hands, she folded it and placed it gently on the podium. I don't need it anymore. The room was still, completely still. Elizabeth smiled. And if you're someone who's been hiding, behind illness, behind fear, behind shame, I want you to know, healing doesn't mean going back to who you were. Sometimes it means finally becoming who you are. The applause came slowly at first, then it swelled. Elizabeth stepped back from the podium, and for the first time in her life, on a stage, with her scars visible and her heart wide open, she let herself be seen. And she didn't flinch. Not once. After the speech, people gathered in small clusters around the room, shaking hands, wiping away quiet tears, exchanging stories that had waited too long to be told. The energy was warm, electric, like a room full of lit candles leaning toward each other. Elizabeth stayed near the podium, taking one conversation at a time. A young nurse thanked her for reminding her why she chose her profession. An older man showed her a photo of his sister, who had worn hats every day of her life. A mother wept openly as she shared how her teenage daughter had just been diagnosed with a genetic condition. Through it all, Elizabeth listened. She held hands. She smiled gently. She didn't hide. I stood nearby, watching, filled with something I hadn't had a word for until now, awe. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw him. He stood just beyond the last row of chairs, tall, still, dressed simply in slacks and a blue button-down. His hair was mostly gray now, his face lined with time, but there was no mistaking him. Carlos. I hadn't seen a picture in years, but I knew. I just knew. He didn't move forward at first, just stood there, watching her with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe. Wonder, or maybe just love that had outlasted the years. I walked over slowly, cautiously. "You're Carlos, aren't you?" I asked quietly. He nodded once. "Yes, I didn't think you'd come. I wasn't sure I would," he said. "But when I saw the article, when I saw her picture, even after all these years, His voice caught. He looked down, then back up. I had to see for myself. I touched his arm gently. "Come, she should be the one to see you now." Elizabeth was finishing a conversation with a young woman when I brought Carlos over. Her eyes met mine, then followed my glance. The moment she saw him, she froze. Her smile faded, not in fear but in something else. Recognition, memory. Time paused between them, a suspended breath of 37 years. Carlos stepped forward, slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter the moment. "Hi, Liz." No one had called her that in decades. She blinked, and I saw the edges of her eyes begin to glisten. "Carlos," she said softly, "you came." He nodded, hands clasped in front of him. "I didn't know if I should. I didn't want to intrude." "You're not," she said. You're here." A pause. Then, as if the words had been waiting in his chest all this time, he said, "I never stopped wondering." Elizabeth looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "I wanted to show you back then," she whispered. "But I was afraid. I thought if you saw what was coming, you wouldn't stay." Carlos stepped closer. "I didn't leave because of what you didn't show me. I left because you were hurting, and I didn't know how to help." A silence stretched between them, thick but kind. "I thought I lost you," she said. He shook his head gently. "You were never lost to me." She smiled then, a small, watery smile. "I'm not the same woman anymore." "I know," he said, "but I'm not the same man either." They stood like that for a long moment, the noise of the room dimming around them. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, faded, frayed, a photo. Elizabeth gasped. It was the old picture, the one of her singing into a hairbrush, the one Carlos had taken all those years ago. "You kept this?" "Always," he said. "You may have hidden from the world, but I never stopped seeing you." Tears rolled down her cheeks, now freely, without shame. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" he asked, voice almost shy. "Catch up on 30 years? Elizabeth laughed, soft, surprised. "I think I'd like that very much." Later that evening, after we returned home, the house was quiet. The children were with Alejandro at the park, and Elizabeth sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the last orange threads of sunlight unravel across the sky. I joined her with a blanket and sat beside her. "So," I said, nudging her playfully. "Carlos." She smiled. "He's older now." "So are you. Do you think I'm foolish?" she asked. "To want to open an old door?" I shook my head. "I think you're brave, and maybe that door was never really closed, just locked from the inside." She looked out over the yard, the breeze lifting her short hair. "I used to think my life ended the day I ran from him, that everything after that was just waiting. And now?" I asked. "Now I think maybe it was just beginning." She sipped her tea, then turned to me. "Thank you, Daniela." I tilted my head. "For what?" "For everything. For seeing me when I didn't want to be seen." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You were never invisible. You just forgot how much light you carried." Elizabeth nodded slowly. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I wore a scarf for 27 years, she said, "but it was never the tumors I was hiding. It was the fear, the shame, the story I told myself that I wasn't worthy of love." She looked at me with clear, steady eyes. "But that story's over now." The wind blew gently, leaves rustled. A car passed in the distance. Inside the house, a soft melody played from the radio, a Spanish love song, something from long ago, and Elizabeth did something she hadn't done in over 3 decades. She began to hum, not under her breath, not timidly, but openly, soft and clear and free. And I knew in that moment that she had finally come home, to herself. Sometimes healing doesn't come in the form of medicine or surgery. It comes when we find the courage to be seen, fully, vulnerably, and without apology. Elizabeth's journey reminds us that no matter how long we've been hiding, it's never too late to step into the light. Not to be perfect, but to be free. And maybe the most powerful kind of beauty is the kind that blooms after pain. Can you relate to Elizabeth's story? Have you ever hidden a part of yourself, afraid the world wouldn't understand? Share your story in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear it today. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you hope, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter in this journey of real people and real courage. Because some stories deserve to be heard, all the way to the end.